Hi, welcome back to the channel and my review for Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So this is once again carrying on with my Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. We're at part 7 now. And this came out 3 years after Freddy's Dead was released. Of course, that was the actual conclusion to the mainline story. And this was a very weird and creative new concept that was brought to the franchise, and of course led by Wes Craven. As far as I'm aware, it was actually an idea that he'd floated past New Line Cinema some years prior to this, and they rejected it on the basis that it was going to be too weird, that it probably wouldn't resonate with audiences. And obviously in '94 he managed to get the chance to come back and do it. I'm assuming that at the time, you know, because of how stale the slasher genre was, it was in dying need of some spicing up. They decided to take a chance with it. And even though it did receive mixed reviews at the time and didn't do that well financially, I think this has gone on to be remembered as a bit of a turning point for horror movies during the 90s. Obviously Scream was the massive movie that really changed the landscape of horror in the 90s, created a brand new style, the much more meta approach, the self-awareness, the self-referential style, and everything like that. And if you really look back to Wes Craven's film he did before that in New Nightmare, I feel like this was really the movie that kind of started that trend off. When you watch them now, you can see a lot of similarities between the two movies. Definitely the best thing about New Nightmare is that creativity in the plot line. And for those of you that don't know the story of New Nightmare, you're basically following the cast and crew for the Elm Street franchise in real life as they're creating the movies. And you're following Wes Craven himself writing the script for these stories. And in doing so, they've basically managed to open a portal for a demon to access the real world who takes the personification of Freddy Krueger, which is a completely bizarre and really out there plot, but something about it kind of works, and I have to admire the creativity for that. I can't think of another movie that had done something like this at the time, especially in horror, and it was a great new direction to take the franchise, and I do think that Wes Craven kind of had the talents and the skills to be able to pull off an idea like that. They didn't get one of these much safer directors that they had in the previous sequels just to bang out the same old thing they'd been doing for the previous 10 years. No, they had Wes Craven back to kind of bring his new idea into the fold that made him one of the big hitters of horror during the 1990s. I really like some of these early ideas as well he was tackling with how horror movies affect its audiences. So of course with Scream you had the kind of teenage effect where it shows how it could maybe desensitize people and make them more okay with seeing and doing extreme things. And obviously here it's focusing on the young child who's watching these movies way too young, is really traumatized by them, is getting all these nightmares, and it kind of shows the effects of all of that it's having on the family. And I have no doubt that at the time Wes Craven was probably receiving a lot of scrutiny from the media about his horror films and what kind of effects they would probably have on audiences. You know, are we watching stuff that's too extreme? Is it kind of changing our brain chemistry and maybe making us think in completely different ways and making it less innocent times, I guess, to the previous years before us? Some interesting questions like that I think this film raised in a time even before Scream came out, which was really nice to see here. However, as for my thoughts on the film, I have always enjoyed this one, but I do think the execution does leave a little bit to be desired. I think all of the pros for the film for me are all in the ideas and the creativity. I think in the way it was actually carried out, it does have some issues. And I think one of the problems is they decided to focus on the story of Heather Langenkamp and her family. And I don't particularly like child actors. I always give them a hard time. I feel a bit bad. But this is no Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense. You know, this kid to me, it doesn't feel right. It feels like he's really overacting, and it really takes me out of the story. And I think when you're used to enjoying in the Nightmare series, watching a bunch of teenagers go through the kind of problems you go through in that period of life, I think to change it up to this extent here, where it's more of a family dynamic, I don't really think it works that well within this franchise. So when a lot of that obviously takes up a lot of the screen time, and I didn't find myself getting into it, not just because of the, as I say, the context of the story, but also because I do think some of the acting really lets down some of these scenes as well. Another issue I have is, because this is effectively shot almost, well, I guess the style of it's meant to be kind of like a documentary where you're following these characters kind of unravelling this bizarre mystery that's going on. So initially it's not really shot like a horror film. You know, everything is very bright. It just feels like a TV movie to some extent, rather than a Nightmare on Elm Street where you've got that dark, brooding atmosphere and everything's kind of, you know, in the shadows. It's not really like that. It's all shot in broad daylight, and it just doesn't really feel like you're watching a horror movie. You know, again, I guess it's probably very difficult to kind of balance those two lines of what they were going for. But to me, there's something just a little bit off-putting about it, especially because you go in, you know, with the preconceptions that this is still a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. So there's something about that that's never really quite gelled with me. Again, another issue, some of the characters as well. I do feel like there should have been more of an effort made to make the actors in real life feel different to the characters they're playing. Like, nothing against Heather Langenkamp, because I've always liked her as Nancy. She's a very likeable person. But I feel like her playing her actual self, she just feels like the same person as Nancy to me. So it ends up, even though you have got this really new and creative idea, I want it to feel different, but you end up just feeling like you're watching a second-rate Nightmare on Elm Street film, because you're just following Nancy when she's older and you've seen it all before and it's not quite as intriguing. So something there is definitely missing for me. And I also think as well that Robert Englund is definitely wasted in this film. Of course, he's still playing Freddy Krueger and it's nice to see him when he shows back up, but in terms of his actual acting self, I don't think he gets enough involvement in the film. And there is kind of a little cool subplot with him where you find out that he's also being haunted by some of these nightmares and visions, and it's starting to send him a little bit crazy, but they never really delve into it that much, and I feel like that was a bit of a missed opportunity. Like, especially since they were going to go there with this idea, I don't know if we had to spend the entire movie just focusing on Heather Langenkamp's character. And I think the last act of the film as well, which does feel like your typical Nightmare on Elm Street series finale as well, where you've got, you know, Freddy Krueger comes back in, Heather has to go into the dream world and beat Freddy. And, you know, it feels to me like something you have seen before. It's not done quite as well as, say, the finale of something like the original or Dream Warriors. So it is just, again, watching another sequel, doing your standard Elm Street ending, which is fine, but I think it maybe could have, since it had already gone this far in trying to really subvert expectations, it could have tried to do something a little bit different there. And I do think as well, now watching it, it's definitely let down by shaky effects work. You know, this was the turn in the 90s where they started to have some more, I guess, like digital effects. I'm not entirely sure what you'd call some of these. They're like green screen backgrounds and stuff like that. And some of it now looks really dodgy. Especially when they first go into the dream and you've got that shot of Heather like falling down that waterfall, and it looks like she's falling across like a pastel drawing. It's really bizarre and it's very, very distracting. So sometimes I think, you know, when you look back to the 80s, because of the limitations with the technology and the fact they had to do everything physically, the movies have aged so much better, whereas you watch the end of New Nightmare now and it doesn't look so good these days. So overall, this one is a little bit disappointing to me. It's definitely an interesting idea, and I do think fans of this franchise should check it out if you haven't watched this one before, because it is very unique and it is worth seeing just for that. And I think it's a movie I probably would have appreciated back at the time it came out. I have no doubt it would have felt fresh and interesting at the time. But I think given the movies that have come after and what we have today, it's a little bit underwhelming now, especially, again, some of these ideas here that he fleshed out further in Scream, and that is a movie that is head and shoulders above New Nightmare from my perspective. So it might be a bit controversial, as I know a lot of you love this one. And as I say, I still enjoy it, but I just don't think it holds up that well these days. So I'm only going to give this one a 3 out of 5, but definitely still recommend it if you've never seen it before. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate you coming along with me for the Elm Street franchise. It's nice to see that a lot of you still really enjoy these old movies. That's always great to see. So let me know all your comments down below and your thoughts on this sequel. And I will be dropping next my Freddy vs. Jason review. I decided to include that in this series of reviews. So let me know all your thoughts there. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.